The air was thick with disappointment the night my family decided they had enough of me. My father sat at the head of the dining table, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and exhaustion, while my mother wiped silent tears from her face. My older brother, the golden child, smirked slightly, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. And me. I just sat there, taking it all in, numb to the accusations, the judgment, and the suffocating feeling of being unwanted. "You have no future, Daniel," my father finally said, slamming his fist on the table. "You refuse to get a real job, you have no ambition, and you bring shame to this family." I swallowed hard, my fingers digging into my palms beneath the table. It wasn't the first time I had heard these words, but tonight, they carried more weight. Because tonight, they had made a decision. They were done with me. "You're a disgrace," my brother added, his voice dripping with superiority. "You've been living under this roof, eating our food, wasting your life while the rest of us work hard. It's time you figure things out on your own." My mother, always the quiet supporter, didn't even meet my eyes. That hurt the most. Little did they know, I wasn't the failure they thought I was. They had no idea about the empire I had built, the business I had carefully grown in silence, and the fortune I had amassed while they ridiculed me. I could have spoken up, could have thrown my success in their faces, but something stopped me. Instead, I let them believe what they wanted. I let them think they were cutting off a lost cause. Because soon, they would realize the truth, and by then, it would be too late. The tension in the house had been brewing for months, but that night at the dinner table was the breaking point. My father's words echoed in my head long after I had left the room, my feet moving mechanically toward my small bedroom. The same bedroom I had spent endless nights working in secret. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the plain walls, the creaky wooden desk in the corner, and the laptop that held all my secrets. To my family, I was nothing more than a failure, a burden. But in reality, I was the mastermind behind a growing business that none of them knew about. For as long as I could remember, my father had measured success by one thing: a stable, corporate job. He was a man of strict discipline, someone who believed in the traditional path: school, college, a respectable job, and then retirement. Anything outside that path was unacceptable. My older brother, Ethan, followed that path to the letter. He graduated with honors, secured a well-paying job, and made my parents proud. I, on the other hand, had taken a different route. After dropping out of college, I had refused to take a normal job. My parents had assumed it was because I was lazy, but the truth was, I had bigger dreams. I had spent years learning the ins and outs of online business, investing in e-commerce, and creating digital revenue streams. But I had kept it hidden. At first, I didn't tell them because I wasn't sure it would work. Then, when the money started coming in, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it without their approval. And by the time I was making more than my brother, I had already decided I would reveal my success on my own terms. I knew my parents were disappointed in me, but what hurt the most was my mother's silence. She had always been my quiet supporter, the one who had sneaked me extra food when I refused to join family dinners, and the one who had covered for me when I skipped classes to work on my projects. But lately, even she had stopped defending me. "I just don't understand you anymore," she said one afternoon when we were alone in the kitchen. "You used to have so much potential. Now, you just waste your days doing nothing." She had no idea that doing nothing meant managing a six-figure online business. Ethan, of course, took every opportunity to remind me of my failures. "Still playing around with your little hobbies?" he asked one morning while fixing his tie. "Dad's right, you know. You need to grow up." I clenched my jaw but said nothing. I had long given up trying to explain myself to him. And then came that fateful night at the dinner table. I should have seen it coming. After another heated discussion about my lack of direction, my father finally dropped the bombshell. "We've decided that it's time for you to be on your own," he said, his voice firm. "We can't keep supporting someone who refuses to take responsibility for his life." My heart pounded, but I kept my face blank. "You're kicking me out." Ethan leaned back in his chair, a smug expression on his face. "Not kicking you out. Just giving you a push in the right direction." My mother wiped her tears but said nothing. I felt something inside me harden. I had given them a chance to see me for who I really was. They had chosen to believe the worst. Fine. They would find out the truth soon enough. And when they did, it would be on my terms. The night after my family disowned me, I packed my belongings in silence. I didn't beg, didn't argue, didn't even try to reason with them. If they thought I was a burden, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me struggle. With only a duffel bag of clothes and my laptop, the heart of my secret empire, I walked out of the house not looking back. At first, it was strange being alone. I had never lived on my own, never had to fend for myself in such a real way. But instead of fear, I felt something unexpected: freedom. No more judgmental stares at the dinner table. No more condescending remarks from Ethan. No more disappointing my father simply by existing. It was time to show them exactly who they had underestimated. For the first time, I poured all my energy into my business without the weight of my family's expectations dragging me down. My secret: dropshipping and digital marketing. While my father and brother believed only in traditional jobs, I had been quietly building a six-figure e-commerce business. I had spent years mastering Facebook ads, TikTok marketing, and finding viral products that people couldn't resist buying. My entire business was automated. Products shipped from suppliers directly to customers, and I never even had to touch the inventory. But now, I wanted more. Their rejection fueled me. If I had been working at 80% before, I cranked it up to 150%. I rented a small apartment, nothing fancy, just enough to keep a roof over my head while I focused on scaling my business to a level they could never ignore. I pulled all-nighters, tested new products, optimized my ad campaigns, and pushed my limits like never before. Within 3 months, my revenue doubled. Within 6 months, I was making more in a week than Ethan made in a month. And the best part? They still had no idea. Ethan's fall, my rise. One evening, while scrolling through LinkedIn, I came across something that made me pause. A post from Ethan. His company was downsizing. Employees were being laid off, and the golden boy wasn't spared. I smirked at the irony. The same brother who had mocked me for not having a real job was now unemployed. The family's pride and joy. Suddenly not so perfect. I debated reaching out, but why should I? I had been thrown out because they believed I had no future. They had turned their backs on me when I needed them. Now, I was thriving while they were struggling. And yet, something inside me told me this wasn't over. It happened on a Sunday night. I was in my apartment, going over my latest campaign reports when my phone buzzed. Mom. I stared at the screen. She hadn't called me once since I left. Curiosity got the best of me. I answered. Daniel. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I waited. Your brother, he lost his job. I said nothing. Your father, he's worried. Things are hard. I almost laughed. Now they needed me. Then she said something that caught me off guard. Your father, he's thinking of selling the house. Money's tight, and without Ethan's income, we can't keep up with everything. I felt a twinge of something, anger, satisfaction, maybe both. They had turned their backs on me, thrown me out like I was nothing. And now, they were struggling. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then, with an icy calmness, I asked, what do you want me to do about it? Silence. And then, the words I never expected. Help us. For the first time, I had the power. They had written me off as a failure, and now, I was the one who could save them. Could walk away. Let them suffer. Let them finally feel what it was like to be abandoned. Or, I could show them who I had become. But if I helped them, it would be on my terms. They would know exactly who they had underestimated. And when I made my decision, it wouldn't just be about money. It would be about making them see the truth, that I was never the failure they thought I was. I agreed to meet them. Not at the house I was thrown out of, but at a restaurant of my choosing. High-end one. The kind where a single meal cost more than what my father used to give me in a month. I arrived early, dressed in a sharp suit, one that screamed success. If I was going to show them who I had become, I wanted them to feel it the moment they saw me. When they walked in, Their reactions were almost comical. My mother's eyes widened as she took in my appearance. My father's jaw tightened, his pride clashing with his curiosity. And Ethan? He looked like he had swallowed a lemon. They sat down awkwardly, unsure of how to address me. "So," I started, leaning back in my chair. "What's this about?" My father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Things have been difficult." I nodded, waiting. Ethan, for once, had nothing to say. He looked down at his hands, ashamed. My mother spoke next, her voice soft. "We need help, Daniel. The house, we might lose it." I tilted my head. "And you came to me for that?" My father stiffened. "We wouldn't have if we had any other option." I smirked. "That much, I believe." There was a long silence. And then, I dropped the bombshell. "You know, it's funny," I said casually. "All these years, you thought I was a failure. That I had no ambition, no future." They didn't respond. "But what you didn't know," I continued, "is that while you were looking down on me, I was building something. Something bigger than all of you could ever imagine." I pulled out my phone, opened my business dashboard, and turned the screen toward them. My mother gasped. My father's eyes widened. Ethan's face turned pale. There, in bold numbers, was my earnings report for the past 6 months, well into the millions. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan was the first to break. This isn't real." His voice was barely above a whisper. I chuckled. "Oh, it's real." My father swallowed hard. "How?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Because while you were busy thinking I was a disappointment, I was proving you wrong." My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We never knew." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You never asked." More silence. Then, my father did something I never expected. He sighed, looking down at his hands, and muttered, "I was wrong." For the first time in my life, my father admitted he had underestimated me. I let them sit with their realization for a moment before speaking again. "I'll help you," I said, and my mother let out a small breath of relief. "But," I continued, "this is on my terms." They all looked at me. "I'll pay off the house," I said. "But I don't owe any of you an apology." "You owe me one." My father nodded slowly. "You're right." Ethan clenched his fists but stayed silent. He knew he had lost. And just like that, the power shifted. I had gone from being the family failure to the one they needed most. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. After that night, everything changed. The weight I had carried for years, the shame, the resentment, the need to prove myself, was finally lifted. I wasn't the same person my family had cast out. I was someone they now respected, even if they didn't fully understand me. I followed through on my promise. I paid off the house, ensuring my parents wouldn't have to worry about losing their home. But I didn't do it as a favor. I did it as a statement. It wasn't about gaining their approval anymore. It was about showing them that I had never needed it in the first place. Ethan struggled the most with the shift in power. For years, he had been the golden child, the one who set the standard for success in our family. Now, he was jobless, while I was running a business that made more in a month than he had made in a year. At first, he refused to acknowledge it. But over time, his arrogance faded. He stopped making condescending remarks, stopped acting like he was better than me. One day, he even asked, "How did you do it?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. By believing in myself when no one else did. For the first time, he had nothing to say. My father, the man who once called me a disgrace, changed in ways I never thought possible. He never outright said he was proud of me, but I saw it in the way he treated me now, with respect. He no longer dismissed my choices. No longer looked at me with disappointment. And my mother. She cried the first time she saw the office space I had bought for my business. "I never knew," she whispered, looking around in awe. "You never asked," I said softly, and she nodded, wiping her tears. It wasn't an easy road, but over time, our relationship began to heal. The greatest realization I had was this: I didn't need their validation anymore. For so long, I had fought to prove myself to them, to make them see my worth. But now, standing on the other side of that struggle, I realized something important. I had always been enough. I had built something incredible, not for them, but for me. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Not because they finally accepted me, but because I had stopped needing them to. As I walked away from my parents' house that evening, a strange sense of peace settled over me. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, their judgments, or their disappointments. I had spent years believing I needed their approval to be successful. But now, standing on the other side of it all, I understood the truth. I was never the failure they thought I was. I had built my own empire, made my own rules, and created a life they never could have imagined. And now, they finally saw me, not as the lost cause they tried to disown, but as someone they needed. But the real victory wasn't their recognition. It was the fact that I no longer needed it. As I got into my car and drove back to the life I had built for myself, I realized that my journey wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. And I had done exactly that. With or without them, I had won.